So next up, podcast listeners, CNN and Marco Rubio go at it. This is really kind of interesting because there's more to this story than actually what meets the eye. As you know, there was a horrible, horrible storm. It's a hurricane, obviously, in Western Florida, and it was Hurricane Ian, and we definitely pray for all those people in Western Florida. It's awful what has happened. It's terrible. And yet CNN, the first thing they did was CNN comes after Marco Rubio, who's a United States Senator from Florida, and goes after him on climate change. And now he doesn't care, which, by the way, folks, this is the Democrat playbook. Every time there's a natural disaster, it's climate change. And every time there's a natural disaster, they basically say Republicans don't care about the people who are affected by the disaster. They did this on every single hurricane that we've had without question. We all know it. And they did it again with Hurricane Ian. So Marco Rubio, this is in the Daily Caller, shreds CNN and the Democrats on disaster relief. So CNN's State of the Union is hosted by Dana Bash. Dana Bash is the lady I'm sure you've seen on CNN State of the Union, where she looks so emaciated and thin that like one gust of wind from climate change might blow her away. But she's on CNN and she's a far left activist and asks only those questions that she's told to ask by the CNN producers. She attempted to call out Republican Florida Senator Marco Rubio on Sunday over disaster relief funds, but was met with immediate backlash. So I'm going to set this up. We have the clip, ladies and gentlemen. This is important because this clip goes to one of the fundamental things that needs to change in the United States that can probably only change with an Article 5 Convention of the States. And I'm going to explain that in a minute. But first up, you have CNN Dana Bash interviewing Marco Rubio. And what is she doing? She's trying to tell Marco Rubio and trying to say to the viewers out there that Marco Rubio doesn't care about the victims of Hurricane Ian in Western Florida. Oh no, it's because of the way he votes. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the clip, and here it is.
Senator, you wrote a letter Friday to the Senate Appropriations Committee asking for disaster relief dollars for desperately needed resources to rebuild Florida communities. After Hurricane Sandy hit northeastern states in 2012, you voted no on a $50 billion relief package. I know you supported a smaller version, but why should other senators vote for relief for your state when you didn't vote for a package to help theirs?
Oh, I've always voted for hurricane and disaster relief. I've even voted for it without pay-fors. What I didn't vote for in Sandy is because they had included things like a roof for a museum in Washington, D.C., for fisheries in Alaska. It had been loaded up with a bunch of things that had nothing to do with disaster relief. And I wouldn't support disaster relief efforts. I would never put out there that we should go use a disaster relief package for Florida as a way to pay for all kinds of other things people want around the country. So I think that's the key in moments like this. And Sandy, unfortunately, they loaded it up. They really did, with a bunch of things that had nothing to do with Sandy. But I voted for every disaster relief package, especially that's clean. And I'll continue to do so. When it comes to Florida, I'll do that again. And we'll make sure that that package is clean and doesn't have stuff for other people in there.
I read the Congressional Research Service report last night. It sounds like that roof actually was damaged by the hurricane. And what happened in Alaska was the result of another disaster. But in any event, my question is about the future. Are you telling me that if Hurricane Ian relief contains anything that smells like pork, you'll vote no?
Sure. I'll fight against it having pork in it. That's the key. We shouldn't have that in there because it undermines the ability to come back and do this in the future. Here's what happens, and people need to understand
it. So that's Marco Rubio, ladies and gentlemen, who actually has a principled response to CNN's Dana Bash. And he says, no, I didn't vote for the funding for Hurricane Sandy because they loaded it up with all kinds of, they loaded up the bill, that is, with all kinds of spending that had nothing to do with Hurricane Sandy. And likewise, Hurricane Ian, the same approach is being taken, namely, well, let's use this hurricane and let's use this awful event, this natural disaster, as an opportunity to fund things that have nothing to do with helping people that have been affected by Hurricane Ian. And of course, Dana Bash is like, well, the last time you did this, you voted against Hurricane Sandy, there actually was funding in there, and the funding really was needed, because I read the Congressional Research article, and it said that the people in Alaska really needed the money, even though, of course, it was for Hurricane Sandy victims in the southeastern United States. And we also had funding in there for a museum in Washington, D.C., and they had a roof that was leaking. I mean, CNN is so incredibly dishonest, and I know we know this, but ladies and gentlemen, the undertone of this interview goes to a much greater problem in the United States of America. And that is, we have out of control government spending. And this has been sustained by Republicans and Democrats. And we have government that has decided that there's nothing it cannot spend money on and not do. And in a normally functioning republic, we would have bills that originated in the United States House of Representatives, and those bills would then be single subject bills. So if the bill is a relief bill for Hurricane Ian, which is what this conversation was about between Dana Lash and Marco Rubio, then in that bill should only be matters related to relief for the victims of Hurricane Ian and nothing else. And that's the way all bills should be that are introduced and ultimately pass in the United States Congress and that are signed by the President of the United States. Namely, they should be single subject bills. They should be honest, and there should be truth in advertising of what the title is of that single subject bill. So a bill that says hurricane relief for victims of Hurricane Ian should not have in it a brand new highway for the citizens of Alaska, or a brand new office building for climate change activists in New York City. No. And I'm just making those other things up, but that's what happens to these bills, which is one of the reasons why we have overspending in Congress. And we also know that such bills that were single subject bills that dealt with so many of these other issues would never pass the United States Congress if there was truth and single subject bills, truth in advertising of those bills, namely a bill with a title. The title has to reflect what is in the bill, and the bill has to reflect what is in the title, and that must be about one subject and one subject only. And many bills wouldn't pass because of that. And good for Marco Rubio for actually being principled and saying, look, of course I want to help the victims. But that's not what this bill does. This bill is another spending spree bill that's going to fuel inflation and put the United States taxpayers and the United States government more and more in debt. And that's why I'm not going to support it. And that's why I didn't support the funding for Hurricane Sandy. And of course, CNN's like, well, that just means you don't care. And so the underlying part and the real theme of this particular segment with CNN, Dana Lash, and Marco Rubio is that we need an Article 5 Convention of States in the United States whereby the states get together, they have a convention, and they propose amendments. And one of the key amendments needs to be single subject bills only. Only single subject bills are allowed to be introduced and passed in the United States Congress. And every single subject bill must be voted upon independently. You can't put a bunch of single subject bills together to create an omnibus bill and have everybody vote on it. No, each single subject bill must stand on its own, and you must have an up or down vote. And quite frankly, I'm pretty sure the founders of this great country had intended for that to be the case, and we've morphed into this other thing where bills become effectively meaningless because there's so much pork and stuff in the bill that has nothing to do with what you're trying to accomplish. So I just want to say this. Article 5, Convention of States, is really necessary. And if this is something that you believe in and are interested in, please go to the Convention of States website and sign up, because they are promoting actively and trying to get more individuals to volunteer to make the Convention of States a reality. And I believe this is one of the things they very much want to promote. And this would really help our country. It would really help our country because so many politicians would be thrown out of office if they voted for a lot of these bills that were single subject bills, as opposed to hiding that funding in a larger bill that had a different title that had nothing to do with what ultimately was inside the bill.
Conventionofstates.com.
Conventionofstates.com. Thank you, Christopher. So please do that. It would make a lot of sense. And I just want to say kudos to Marco Rubio. Plenty of times he's done things I don't agree with, and this is typical for all politicians. No politician is perfect. But way to go, Marco Rubio, for actually trying to engage in fiscal conservatism and limited government and discipline bills that come out of the United States Congress.